February 18th, I had the privilege of visiting Torun, Poland, where Nicolaus Copernicus was born 550 years ago. And I was asked to give a keynote speech in a celebration of his birth by the Polish government. And I decided to give it on the topic of the next Copernican revolution. Nicolaus Copernicus was a priest, and he wanted to help the church forecast when Easter takes place. They always got it wrong by a few days because they had the earth at the center of the universe. And he realized that if you put the sun in the middle of the universe, the local universe, the solar system, then the model predicts Easter much better. And so the church adopted his model, but insisted that it's only theoretical. The earth is still at the center of the universe, and they made his book forbidden until the 19th century. He got the published copy on his deathbed. And actually, after giving the lecture, I was given a copy bound by leather of the original book that Copernicus wrote. And my message about the next Copernican revolution relates to his work, because he realized that we are not at the physical center of the world, but the next revolution would be that we are not at the intellectual center of the world. Many of my colleagues think that we are unique and special, and obviously on Earth, many people think that we are the most intelligent species. That's why we serve less intelligent species in restaurant menus at Harvard Square. And the question is, first, will it still be true a decade from now because we are developing artificial intelligence systems that might outsmart us? And second, whether it's true globally in the universe, whether Albert Einstein was the smartest scientist who ever lived since the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago. I don't think so. There are hundreds of billions of stars like the Sun in the Milky Way galaxy alone. And a substantial fraction of them, about a quarter or so, have a planet like the Earth, roughly at the same separation. And potentially, those planets could develop the chemistry of life as we know it, and it could have done so billions of years ago, because most stars formed billions of years before the Sun. And guess what? With the kind of technology we are using, rockets that allowed us to launch spacecraft like Voyager, we can traverse the Milky Way galaxy from one side to the other in less than 1 billion years. And that means that space trash from other civilizations might have reached our vicinity. And you may wonder, have we checked? Did we find a tennis ball among all the rocks in our backyard that may indicate that our neighbor plays tennis? And the answer is, only over the past decade, we developed survey telescopes and satellites that monitor the vicinity of the Earth, and were able to see objects as big as a football field from the reflection of sunlight off them. And the first such object that came from outside the solar system was given the name Oumuamua because it was discovered by a telescope in Hawaii. And that name in the Hawaiian language means a scout. And it was very strange, very different than the rocks we find in the solar system. The amount of sunlight reflected from it changed by a factor of 10 as it was tumbling every 8 hours. And it was pushed away from the sun by some mysterious force, in addition to the force of gravity acting on it, without showing any evaporation, no cometary tail of dust or gas. And the question was, what's pushing it? The most likely shape that this object had was a flat shape, pancake-like. based on the reflection of sunlight from it. But we will never know because this object is now far away, our telescopes cannot detect it, and we had limited information while it was passing near Earth and was flagged as a near-Earth object. In 2025, there will be a new survey telescope called the Rubin Observatory that will survey the southern sky every 4 days with a 3.2 billion pixel camera, 1,000 times more than you have on your cell phone. And it could find many more Oumuamua-like objects. But in fact, this object was discovered on October 2017, and nearly 4 years earlier, the US government satellites discovered roughly a 0.5 meter sized object, the size of a watermelon, that collided with Earth and burned up in its atmosphere. A meteor that was moving so fast that it couldn't be bound by the sun's gravity. It came from outside the solar system. According to the US government, this is the first interstellar meteor. And I led an expedition to search for the materials left over from this meteor in the Pacific Ocean. It exploded about 20 kilometers over the ocean surface, 90 kilometers away from Manus Island in Papua New Guinea, and the ocean depth is 2 kilometers. We built a sled with magnets on both sides and collected magnetic particles that may have melted off the surface of the object when it was exposed to the fireball that it generated as a result of its friction on air. And guess what? We found 850 such spherules, brought them back to Harvard University, to the laboratory of my colleague, Professor Stein Jacobson. All of this was done in June 2023. And within 8 months, we were able to analyze those molten droplets and find that 1/10 of them, about 80 of them, belong to a type that was never reported before, made of materials that cannot be found on the crust of Earth, the Moon, Mars, in asteroids. It looks as if the composition of this material is from outside the solar system. So not only the US Space Command provided evidence that the object was moving too fast to be bound to the sun, but now we have some materials. It's the first time that humans put their hands on materials from a large object that came from outside the solar system. That's very exciting. And the question is it a rock of a type that we've never seen before from another star? Or is it a Voyager-like spacecraft? Because this object was tougher than even iron meteorites. It disintegrated in the lower atmosphere, where the stress exerted on it by the friction on air was much larger than the stress exerted on any other meteorite in the catalog that NASA compiled for meteors over the past decade, 272 of them. So a Voyager-like meteor would appear to have unusual material strength and also unusual speed because it was propelled by a rocket. And so that's the fundamental question. Are we alone? Did we find a debris from another civilization? And obviously, when Voyager leaves the solar system in 10,000 years, it will not be functional anymore. We are polluting interstellar space with trash. Just like plastics in the ocean that keep accumulating over time, you can imagine a lot of trash in interstellar space that kept accumulating from civilizations that came and then went. There were lots of tragedies over cosmic histories of stars dying out and their civilizations disappearing. We were not around to witness that. we just came a few million years ago, the human species, on Earth, and obviously the first thing we think is that we are at the center of the universe. Well, that's not surprising, because my daughters, when they were young, thought that they're at the center of the world. And they had a shock when we brought them to the kindergarten on the first day. And so for our civilization to mature, we need to find others. But not only that we are not at the center of stage in the cosmic play, we are also arriving to the play at the end of the play, a few million years ago, which is one part in 10,000 of the entire history of the universe. So if you arrive to a play at the end of the play and you are not at the center of stage, the play is not about you. What could be simpler than that? We keep insisting that if we are visited, it will be because the aliens care about us, want to monitor us, want to learn from us. I hold exactly the opposite view. I think that we were not interesting for a long while. Perhaps only over the past century we started to show some signs of intelligence by developing science and technology. But most of our cosmic neighbors are not aware of that. And they started journeys long before we came to exist. And it's our opportunity to learn from them, because they arrived to our doorstep before we arrived to their doorstep. And so rather than seeing it as a threat, the way Stephen Hawking described it a decade ago and warned us not to make a sound out of fear that they might invade us, no, I think that it's actually to our benefit to look around and learn from them. Because right now on Earth, if you read the newspapers every day, you realize we are not really showing signs of intelligence. We are fighting each other, investing $2 trillion in conflicts and wars worldwide. And we live for such a short time, so why shorten it even further by killing other people? That makes no sense. That doesn't show intelligence. In fact, my hope is that a message of peace will arrive to Earth from another star, because that's the best way to survive longer. And it's a messianic message that will not originate from Earth, but from another civilization out there. And therefore, if we find a letter or a package in our mailbox, it may inspire us to do better than we are currently doing. That's my real hope. And that's why I went to the Pacific Ocean to check. But all we found so far are millimeter-sized particles that do not tell us what the original object was. To find out, we need bigger pieces. And that's what we hope to look for in our next expedition, hopefully in the coming year. We are currently seeking funding for that. And the hope is that if we find bigger pieces, they would first tell us whether it's a natural object or an artificial object. They could also tell us about elements that were vaporized during the explosion as a result of the fireball that surrounded the object. But if we find bigger pieces, then the interior of these pieces will retain those elements. And also, big pieces will give us enough material to date the object, to say how old it is based on radioactive isotopes. And then when we know how old it is, and we know the speed by which it was moving, we can figure out from what distance it came and from which direction. So in fact, we could even pinpoint the source, the origin of the object. That's what we hope to figure out in our next expedition. And if it turns out that the big pieces indicate a technological gadget with buttons on it, the question is, should we press a button? And I asked this question to the first class students at Harvard College. If I do find a gadget and it has buttons on it, should we press a button? Half of the class said, please don't. It will affect all of us. And the second half said, please do. Maybe it's ChatGPT 100. We want to figure out what it can do. And so one student raised his hand and said that, well, Professor Loeb, given the split vote, what would you actually do? And I said, don't worry, I will take it to a laboratory and examine it before engaging with it. So when we will find a gadget from another civilization in our backyard, we will have to decide what to do with it. If it's not functional anymore, if it's just a piece of trash, we can analyze it in a laboratory. But if it's functional, it's just like meeting a person in your backyard. You have to figure out what the intent is and what this visitor is seeking before deciding how to respond to it. There is no recipe to responding to a visitor in your backyard. You have to figure out first what this visitor is doing there. And we will then have to respond probably rather quickly, and that would be an international matter, because any visitor from outside the solar system should not be a national security issue. It should be a visit that is shared by all humans, because the borders between nations are not visible from interstellar space. They're immaterial. Nobody cares how we split the land on this tiny rock that we were born on. And so it's a matter that all humans should be informed about. And the Director of National Intelligence submitted 3 reports over the past few years to the US Congress, in which she described unidentified anomalous phenomena, objects that are seen by military personnel but cannot be identified. And as a result, there was a new office established in the Pentagon, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, that is looking back at reports and trying to figure out what these objects are. And they figured out that 97% of the objects can be explained, but there is still 3% that they don't know what they were. And of course, from a scientist's point of view, even if one object in 1,000 or one object in 1,000,000 is technological, but from outside of this earth, it will change the future of humanity. So while the Pentagon can be satisfied with identifying almost all the objects, I am really bored by any human-made object or natural object like a bird. I'm really excited about the opportunity to find an object that came from another civilization, and therefore, a few years ago, I established the Galileo Project. And we built a new observatory at Harvard University that is monitoring the sky 24/7 with infrared, optical, radio, and audio sensors. And the data is analyzed by machine learning software to figure out whether there is anything beyond birds, drones, airplanes, satellites, meteors that we know about. As of now, we haven't found anything unusual among the hundreds of thousands of objects that we looked at, but we keep looking. And our goal is to help government figure out the nature of those remaining few percent of the unidentified anomalous phenomena. Because the sky is not classified, the oceans are not classified, and therefore scientists can help government and help the public to answer the question, are we alone? Or another way to put it, Enrico Fermi, about 72 years ago, asked, where is everybody? And he was surprised that we don't see evidence for aliens in Los Alamos at the lunch table where he was having lunch. And to me, that question, where is everybody, is presumptuous. because it's just like standing at home, looking around and saying, we don't have any partner, I don't see anyone around me. But we all know that to find a partner, you need to go to dating sites. At the very least, you need to leave your home or look through the windows. Fermi didn't do any of that. New knowledge does not fall into our lap. We have to seek it. We invested $10 billion in the Large Hadron Collider to find the Higgs boson. We invested $10 billion in the Webb telescope to find the first galaxies in the universe. It's all a matter of putting the time and money to gain new scientific knowledge by collecting evidence. A lot of people have opinions about Fermi's paradox, but I want to figure out the answer like a kid. I'm fundamentally a curious farm boy. I was born on a farm, collected eggs every afternoon, was connected to nature much more so than to people, have no footprint on social media because of that. And I'm still curious, trying to figure out the world around me without jumping to conclusions, without evidence. And my hope is that during my lifetime, I will discover some evidence, because it's a path that was not taken. And if you go on a path that was not taken, you might find low-hanging fruits, because nobody picked them up.